Welcome to our channel. Today we're diving into the extraordinary life and heartbreaking story of Joan Blondell, a Hollywood icon whose talent, charm, and resilience defined her career. From her early days as a vaudeville performer to her rise as a leading lady of the 1930s and beyond, Blondell's journey was filled with triumphs, challenges, and untold secrets. Join us as we explore her captivating story, from her glamorous successes to the trials she endured behind the scenes, and uncover how this remarkable actress left her indelible mark on Hollywood. Joan Blondell's earliest memories were shaped by the bright lights of vaudeville. Born Rose. Joan Blondell in 1906, she was practically destined to become an entertainer. She came into this world as part of a family already immersed in show business. Her parents were traveling vaudevillians, people who lived by the tight schedules and uncertain paychecks of an old-time circuit that demanded grit, flexibility, and a knack for performance. From the very beginning, the stage was her second home. Legend says her cradle was quite literally a trunk used for props and costumes. That single detail, her sleeping in a trunk backstage, perfectly foreshadows the kind of life Joan would lead. Unconventional, full of surprises, and always on the move. While other kids were learning to walk in cozy nurseries, Joan was taking her first steps in the wings of packed theaters. From 4 months old, she had already appeared on stage, and one can just imagine the wide-eyed baby, held aloft in front of an audience roaring with appreciation. If you paused to think about it, you might see how such a start would either shape a child into a performer for life or utterly scare them away from the spotlight. Because her parents kept a relentless touring schedule, little Joan roamed from city to city, rarely calling any one place home. She got a taste of different cultures early on, as the family's vaudeville circuit stretched far and wide. She lived in big cities and small towns. She learned to adapt to changing crowds and shifting family fortunes. Once, her family even stayed in Honolulu. Then there was a period in Australia, of all places. By the time she was a teenager, she had more stamps in her mental passport than many people managed to get in a lifetime. Eventually, her family moved to Dallas, Texas. If one tries to imagine her arrival still glowing with that adventurous spirit, there must have been an underlying feeling she wasn't destined to stay in Dallas forever. From the outside, it might have been easy to mistake her for an average girl next door, but underneath that sweet exterior was a young woman with big dreams and the personality to make them come true. Joan was undeniably attractive, with her blonde hair and disarming blue eyes. She decided to try her hand at beauty pageants in the mid-1920s. She began with Miss Dallas, a smaller local pageant, though it was still big enough to hint that she could climb to more prestigious competitions. And sure enough, she took the title and kept going, making it all the way to the finals in Miss America and Miss Universe. That kind of ascent might inflate any young woman's ego, but more interesting was how Joan navigated this realm. She wasn't content to remain the same person. She decided to change one crucial aspect, her name. So for a stretch of time, she experimented with Rosebud Blondell, a playful twist that accentuated her whimsical nature. It was a risk, but then again, so was jumping from stage to stage without a traditional sense of home. In hindsight, that name change was likely her way of taking charge of her own narrative. She wasn't going to remain a child star or a pageant queen. She was shaping her own destiny, step by daring step. In 1927, at the age of 21, Joan moved to New York City. The Big Apple, bustling, gritty, and bursting with opportunity, drew countless hopefuls from all over the country, luring them with the promise of stardom. If you're imagining that Joan's path would be cluttered with setbacks, well, she might surprise you, because she landed in a Broadway production almost immediately. It's an astonishing feat, especially in a metropolis where thousands of performers fight for limited roles. But nothing was going to stop Joan from chasing her dream. She quickly took on odd jobs, modeling, clerical work, and even working with a circus to support herself. It was her hustle, combined with an unshakable love for performing, that propelled her. Then in 1929, she landed an unforgettable opportunity, a Broadway show called Penny Arcade, in which she starred alongside James Cagney. Their on-stage chemistry lit up the theater so well that Warner Brothers decided to turn that production into a movie, Sinner's Holiday, with the same leads. The show's success catapulted her from Broadway newbie to a fresh face in Hollywood. Once she arrived in Hollywood, she found that the glitz and glamour of Tinseltown came with a price. The studio system in full swing during the 1930s was notorious for pressuring new stars into changing their names, appearances, and even personalities. Jack L. Warner, no small figure in the industry, insisted Joan adopt the name Inez Holmes, presumably because it sounded exotic or easier to market, or more in line with some arbitrary notion of star power. Joan, however, had her own mind. She wasn't about to lose the identity she'd nurtured. She refused. That stubbornness foreshadowed the strong will she'd show time and again when faced with oppressive demands. She had the backbone to hold on to her name and was willing to risk everything to assert her identity in an environment that typically treated stars like commodities. This rebellious streak was also visible in her collaborations. She became a sort of dynamic duo with James Cagney. Their co-star magnetism was so potent that Hollywood wanted them together in multiple films, 6 in fact. To spend that much time with a co-star can create friction, but it brought Joan and Cagney closer. Joan even said they adored each other. Cagney, for his part, once stated that Joan was the only woman he ever loved, besides his wife. While that might raise eyebrows, it also shows how Joan inspired admiration from many men, co-stars, and audiences alike. Another legend who crossed Joan's path was Jean Harlow, a platinum blonde bombshell who was as famous for her comedic timing as for her unapologetic sensuality. Joan recounted a story of how Harlow never wore undergarments, and how Cagney once asked Harlow how on earth she managed to keep those things up, to which she quipped, "I ice them." That anecdote was not just comedic fluff. It was a peek into the carefree, cheeky side of old Hollywood. There was a notorious photo taken of her in 1932, a publicity still that appeared to show her sitting backward on a chair without a stitch of clothing. Whether she was actually nude is debatable, but the photograph scandalized the Warner Brothers executives, who deemed it way too provocative for their leading lady. They banned it outright, effectively turning a presumably playful moment into a rebellious statement. That's the kind of push-pull Joan had to deal with, being a good girl star at Warner Brothers, but also wanting the creative freedom and personal liberty to express herself in risque or bold ways. Fortunately, she had friends in Hollywood who understood her predicament. Glenda Farrell, in particular, was a best friend and co-star who loved working with Joan. They made a comedic pair in 9 separate films, and audiences ate up their chemistry. Behind the scenes, they were just as friendly, defying the stereotype of competitive divas who can't share a spotlight. The truth is, Joan was probably grateful to have a buddy who knew how insane the Hollywood grind could be. Her personal life, however, was far more tumultuous. Given her demanding filming schedule, she had little time to meet people outside the industry, so she ended up falling for George Barnes, a cinematographer she met on set. This romance quickly led to a secretish wedding in 1933, far away from the tabloids that thrived on public ceremonies. At first, it might have seemed romantic, an actress and the man literally capturing her on film, forging a life together on and off set. But behind closed doors, the marriage was rocky. Some described it as intense, fueled by passion and arguments. It became a cycle of them working together well in professional contexts, only to butt heads at home. Tensions rose when Joan got pregnant. She was initially reluctant to start a family, and heartbreakingly, she chose not to proceed with her first 2 pregnancies. The third one, though, resulted in a child. Little Norman Scott was born after a terrifying 20-hour labor that left Joan with a fractured coccyx and him with the umbilical cord twisted around his neck. Miraculously, he survived, and so did Joan, but this life-altering event didn't save her marriage. In 1936, she and George Barnes divorced. That same year, she turned around and married Dick Powell, another co-star from one of her earlier films, Gold Diggers, of 1933. Powell officially adopted her son, and the pair also welcomed another child, Ellen. Now with 2 young kids and a second marriage, Joan tried leaving Warner Bros. In 1939 to focus on domestic life. For a time, she traded her glamorous gowns for aprons and baby bottles, probably hoping she'd finally found the stability that had eluded her for so long. But her second marriage deteriorated as well. She made it known that Powell had a harsh attitude toward her at home, frequently telling her she could leave if she didn't like something. Finally, she'd had enough of feeling unloved, so she decided to divorce him in 1944. One might have expected her to swear off men forever after that, but old habits die hard. She fell into a pattern, meeting someone at work, rushing toward marriage, and then discovering the relationship wasn't what she had envisioned. Sure enough, in 1948 she married her third husband, Mike Todd. If her previous unions were complicated, this one was downright disastrous. He had money troubles that led them into bankruptcy, and he had an aggressive streak that allegedly culminated in him hanging Joan by the ankles out of a hotel window. However, if any rumor was more eyebrow-raising than that, it was the widely circulated claim that Todd left her for Elizabeth Taylor. Joan set the record straight, insisting she and Todd were over long before Elizabeth Taylor came into the picture. Perhaps the heartbreak was overshadowed by sheer relief at escaping a toxic relationship. Nonetheless, in reflecting on her marriages, Joan insisted she had no regrets. Each husband had provided something. Her first gave her a sense of home, her second gave her security, and Todd was passion incarnate. She admitted she loved them all, but none was meant to last forever. She jumped back into Broadway in 1943 after initially leaving Hollywood, then found herself returning to film in 1950 with The Blue Veil, where she earned an Academy Award nomination. Although she no longer headlined pictures the way she had in her early career, she refused to fade into obscurity. The next frontier for her, fittingly, was television, an industry that had begun to overshadow the old studio system of Hollywood. But stepping onto the small screen wasn't always a glamorous prospect for big film stars. Joan discovered this firsthand when she joined Lucille Ball for a brief stint on The Lucy Show in 1965. From the outside, it might have seemed like a triumphant cameo, the union of 2 comedic legends. In reality, Joan disliked how Lucy publicly criticized her performance, making her feel humiliated on set. Joan's typical resilience kicked in. She walked off after finishing her second episode and never returned. She had fought for her autonomy since the early days of vaudeville. She wouldn't give it up for TV stardom. In 1968, she appeared in Stay Away, Joe, an Elvis Presley film that gave her a chance to work with the king of rock and roll. It was a bright spot for a performer who had wrestled with the demands of Hollywood's golden era, survived heartbreak, and was still finding ways to channel her creative energy into something new. Another outlet she found was writing. She penned a novel titled Center Door Fancy, which many suspected was an autobiography thinly veiled as fiction. The storyline featured vaudeville roots climbing to stardom in Hollywood and included characters eerily similar to her real-life husbands. Her depiction of Powell echoed rumors that he was stingy. Writing became a form of catharsis, a medium that allowed her to reflect on her life's tumult in ways the public might not have fully appreciated back when she was strictly known as an actress. Yet her final years were not free of further emotional burden. Her daughter Ellen Powell suffered from addiction to a dangerous substance. It was a terrible battle, and Joan, despite everything she had endured, stood by her child. Ellen eventually got sober, but the ordeal undoubtedly left scars on both mother and daughter. Joan's last major cinematic mark came when she appeared as Vi in the 1978 sensation Grease. By then, she was a grand dame of show business. It was as if she'd come full circle, having once been a musical star in the 30s, and now cameoing in one of the most iconic musical films of the 70s. Behind the scenes, though, she was harboring a revelation that would only come out much later. She had been hiding a traumatic event from 1927 when a police officer accosted her while she was working at a library. He assaulted her, then threatened her life if she told anyone. She carried that secret for decades, finally confiding in her daughter and then putting it out into the world in her memoir. In 1979, Joan's health took a dire turn. After weeks in the hospital, doctors diagnosed her with leukemia. This time, she couldn't script a triumphant comeback. Surrounded by her children and sister, she passed away on Christmas Day. She was 73. Yet death did not erase her legend. Her name remains on Hollywood's Walk of Fame, celebrating her long career in showbiz. If you ever stroll that boulevard, you might pause by the star that reads Joan Blondell, remembering her extraordinary journey. A baby who practically started her life in a stage trunk, a pageant queen who refused to change her name for a powerful studio head, a performer who blazed through film after film, leaving behind a legacy that's both shiny and shadowy. One can't help but admire the resilience and spirit required to survive multiple tumultuous marriages, personal heartbreaks, creative disappointments, and an era that was brutal to women in entertainment. Joan Blondell's life was a testament to her resilience, talent, and unwavering spirit. From her sparkling performances in classic films to her perseverance through personal struggles, she remains a shining symbol of Hollywood's golden age. Though her journey ended tragically, her legacy continues to inspire generations of fans and artists. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Joan Blondell's life, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories about the stars who shaped the magic of vintage Hollywood. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.